Why was she sitting so quietly, as if silence could erase the weight she carried? The cabin buzzed with the usual rhythm of travel, the whine of engines, the soft chatter of passengers, the clink of metal trays. To anyone looking, she was just another face among hundreds. Headphones in, eyes closed, still. Seat 21C, but to Elena Ruiz, quiet was never peace. Quiet was the only place she could hide from the echoes of a past that refused to die. She had boarded Flight 732 with a single purpose: to disappear for a while, to let the world forget her name just as she was trying to forget it herself. The uniform was gone, the call sign erased. Horizon, that was the name they once shouted across radios and tarmac. A name that had once meant courage, precision, control. Now it just reminded her of everything she couldn't save. The engines roared gently beneath the floor. The light outside was blinding, a midday sun over endless clouds. Passengers stretched, Reed dozed. In row 18, a couple argued softly about connecting flights. Somewhere up front, a baby cried. The world felt normal, harmless, and maybe that was why she allowed herself, for the first time in years, to close her eyes and breathe. But peace has a cruel sense of timing. It never lasts. The first jolt came like a whisper, a tremor that rippled through the fuselage, soft enough to be mistaken for turbulence. A few heads lifted. Someone laughed nervously. Elena didn't move. Then came the second, harder. The overhead bins rattled, a drink spilled. And beneath the calm voice of the engines, she heard something else, a sound only a pilot would recognize. The subtle shift of an engine losing balance. A tone change, too quick, too wrong. Her eyes opened. Seconds later, the captain's voice cracked through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain calm and fasten your seat belts." Calm words, but not a calm tone. She'd heard that tone before over radios, during missions when everything was falling apart and someone had to lie just long enough to keep everyone steady. She glanced toward the cockpit door. The attendants were whispering to each other, eyes darting. Elena caught fragments, not responding, backup systems failing. Oxygen masks, she clenched her jaw, not yet, don't move yet. Across the aisle sat a man with a broad frame and the kind of posture that came from years of command. He looked military, calm, alert, assessing. He met her gaze briefly. Neither spoke, but both knew something was off. Then came the alarm, not the gentle ding of turbulence, a full-bodied mechanical scream from the cockpit, the kind of alarm that cuts through every heartbeat. Panic swept the cabin. A woman cried out. Luggage thudded from an open bin. The oxygen masks didn't drop, not yet, but the fear did, thick, heavy, contagious. The tall man stood. His voice boomed with the weight of authority. "Everyone listen up." The command in his tone silenced the chaos. "My name's Captain Jonathan Briggs, U.S. Navy SEAL. I need everyone to stay calm and stay seated." People looked up at him as if he were the only solid thing left in a crumbling world. "We've got a situation. Both pilots are down. We need someone, anyone with flight experience. Military, civilian, anything. Who can fly this aircraft?" The air froze. Elena's heart stopped. For a few seconds there was nothing but stunned silence. Then whispers. Someone muttered, "He's kidding, right?" Another voice cracked, "Oh God, we're going to die." Briggs repeated himself, louder, sharper this time. "We don't have time. If anyone here can fly, step forward now." Elena looked down at her hands. The same hands that once wrapped around a throttle at Mach speeds. The same hands that had refused to shake even when the sky was on fire. But they were trembling now. No one stood. Faces turned away. Passengers clung to each other, waiting for someone, anyone, to save them. But no one did. And then, quietly, she heard her own voice before she even decided to speak. "I can." The sound barely carried over the murmurs, but Briggs heard it. Everyone did. 100 eyes turned toward her, the quiet woman in 21C. She rose slowly, removed her headphones, and for the first time since boarding met the light head-on. Calm face, sharp eyes. There was something in her expression, something that silenced doubt. Briggs studied her, suspicion flickering behind his discipline. "Who are you?" he asked. "Elena Ruiz," she said. "Former Air Force F-16 pilot, call sign Horizon." A beat of disbelief, then a collective gasp. The transformation was instant. The quiet passenger became something else, a figure from another life. Briggs's jaw set. He nodded once decisively. "You're up." The attendants scrambled. The cockpit door opened with a metallic click. Elena stepped through, the noise of the cabin fading behind her. The smell of burnt circuitry hit her first, smoke. She coughed once, waving it away. Then she saw them, the two pilots slumped forward, unmoving, oxygen masks hanging uselessly. The panels alive with red lights and flashing warnings. A dead autopilot, a dropping altitude. Her heart sank, but not from fear, from recognition. She'd seen this kind of chaos before. It was like walking into the aftermath of a dogfight, noise, alarms, confusion. But beneath all of that, there was a strange calm rising inside her. The one thing her training had never let her forget: the world only slows down when you refuse to panic. She slid into the captain's seat. The motion felt alien and familiar at once. Her fingers found switches instinctively. She glanced at the gauges. Hydraulics low, altimeter dropping, engines unstable on 2. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Okay," she whispered, "one step at a time." Briggs appeared at the doorway. "Tell me what you need." She didn't look back, calm and no interruptions. Her hands flew across the controls, years of muscle memory returning like an old melody. She adjusted the pitch, trimmed the rudder, eased the throttle. The aircraft responded, sluggish at first, then steady. The violent shaking began to fade. Outside, the clouds leveled. Inside, hope returned, faint, fragile, but alive. She reached for the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Flight 732. Both pilots incapacitated. I am a former Air Force pilot attempting control, requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing." The radio crackled. A voice replied, tight with disbelief. "Flight 732, confirm identity. Elena Ruiz, call sign Horizon." A pause. Then the controller's tone changed, professional, urgent. "Roger that, Horizon. You're doing great. We've got you. Diverting to Dallas, Fort Worth, runway 17R. You are cleared to descend to 15,000 feet. Weather's clear. Fire crews are being mobilized." She exhaled. For the first time in years, the headset felt natural. Her body remembered what her heart had tried to forget, that flying wasn't just duty. It was freedom. It was the one place she had always belonged. Briggs moved closer. "How long were you out?" "Too long," she said, eyes fixed ahead. "Let's make it count." He took a seat behind her, reading emergency checklists off his phone. She guided the aircraft down, steady hands on trembling machinery. The passengers behind them couldn't see her face, but they could feel the shift, the calm that only real control can bring. Then another alarm, hydraulic pressure. Her stomach twisted. The landing gear system was failing. If it collapsed entirely, they'd have no wheels for landing, just metal against concrete. A slide, a spark, maybe worse. She forced herself to breathe. "Not yet, not now." Briggs looked at her. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked across dials, lights, warning codes. She found it, a fractured line in the system, unfixable midair. Her hands tightened on the yoke. "Landing gear's dead," she said softly. "We'll have to do a belly landing." He swallowed hard but nodded. "Tell me what to do." Her voice came out steady, almost cold. "Read me the emergency checklist for gear failure. Skip steps that need hydraulics. We improvise." And they did, together. For the next 20 minutes they fought the aircraft line by line, step by step. She rerouted power, reduced speed, balanced the descent manually, each correction a small miracle. Sweat dripped down her temples. Her arms burned. But her mind was clear. The way it used to be before everything had fallen apart. In the cabin, the passengers held hands, prayed, whispered names of loved ones. A woman clutched a small photo of her children. A man murmured promises he might never keep. And through the hum of fear came a calm voice over the intercom, Elena's voice. Brace for emergency landing. Head down. Stay calm. You will survive this. She didn't promise more than that. Just survival, that was enough. Outside, the world brightened, sunlight glinting off the clouds as they broke through. And in that moment, with the runway still miles away, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Control. Not over the aircraft, but over herself. The fear, the guilt, the memories, they were still there, but smaller now. Manageable. She was flying again. And no one, not even fate, could take that away. Briggs leaned forward, his voice low. You've done this before, haven't you? She allowed herself a small, wry smile. Too many times, but never like this. Below them, the faint outline of Dallas began to take shape, a grid of silver and glass beneath a blue horizon. The tower's voice returned. Flight 732, you are cleared for emergency approach. Winds calm. Fire crews are standing by. She adjusted the descent. The aircraft obeyed, smooth, responsive. And yet deep inside, a quiet fear stirred, not of dying, but of being remembered, because she had spent years trying to bury Horizon. And now the world would remember her again, not as the woman she'd become, but as the soldier she had been. She whispered under her breath, a prayer more to herself than anyone else. Let them live, that's all that matters. The runway lights gleamed in the distance, bright against the afternoon haze. The passengers braced. Briggs tightened his harness. Elena's hands tightened on the yoke, her jaw set. The plane descended, low and fast, metal groaning against gravity. She could already see the shimmer of heat rising from the tarmac. A storm of memories flashed, missions, losses, faces she couldn't save. And yet, through it all, one truth burned clear in her chest. Sometimes, you don't get to choose when you're called back into the sky. The runway was coming fast, too fast. Every muscle in her body tightened as Elena guided the crippled jet lower. The altimeter ticked down in slow, merciless numbers. Wind buffeted the nose, making the yoke shudder in her grip. She could feel the aircraft resisting her like an animal sensing its own death. But she refused to let it go. Not yet. 200 feet, Briggs called from behind her. Reading off the screen, his voice strained. Elena's breath came slow, deliberate. Hold. The ground rushed toward them. The runway lights flickered through the cockpit glass like shooting stars. She eased the throttle, pitched the nose higher. The plane's shadow met its reflection on the concrete. Then, impact. Metal screamed. The fuselage slammed down, skidding. Sparks exploded beneath the wings, streaking orange and white along the length of the runway. The entire cabin jolted. Luggage tore free, overhead panels rattled loose. The smell of burning rubber and hydraulic fluid filled the air. Passengers cried out, voices overlapping with the tearing sound of metal against asphalt. But inside the cockpit, her world narrowed to sound and feel. Yoke steady. Keep the nose aligned. Don't let it drift. Every second felt infinite, the grind, the vibration, the roar of survival. Briggs' voice cracked through the chaos. You're holding it, keep her straight. I see it, she said through clenched teeth. Come on, come on. The runway stretched like an endless corridor of fire. At last, the momentum began to die. The plane shuddered, slowed, then lurched to a stop with one final metallic cry. Silence. For a heartbeat, the entire world stopped breathing. Then from behind them came the sound, first a sob, then a cheer, then another. Applause, cries of relief. The kind of sound only the living can make after standing on the edge of death. Elena's hand stayed on the yoke. She didn't move, didn't trust herself to. Her fingers were locked in place, white-knuckled, as if letting go would let the fear rush back in. Briggs leaned forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You did it. Her voice was a whisper. We did. He smiled faintly. You just saved 243 souls. For a long moment she didn't answer. Her body was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her hollow. Her eyes darted over the instrument panel one last time, confirming what she already knew: both engines dead, gear destroyed, hydraulics flatlined. But the aircraft was still in one piece, and so were they. Outside, sirens wailed as emergency crews raced toward the wreck. Fire trucks surrounded the plane, red lights flickering across the metal skin. A fine mist of extinguisher foam hissed along the sides. Through the cockpit glass, Elena watched firefighters waving and running, faces pale but alive with urgency. She exhaled, long and trembling. "It's over." Briggs nodded. "Yeah, for them." He meant the passengers, but for her it wasn't that simple. When the attendants finally opened the cabin doors, sunlight spilled in. Passengers stumbled out onto the runway, some barefoot, some crying, others laughing through tears. One woman dropped to her knees and kissed the ground. Another man hugged the stranger beside him. Elena unbuckled her harness and stood. Her legs trembled under her weight. For a second she gripped the console to steady herself. Her reflection in the glass caught her eye: sweat, soot, a faint smear of blood on her temple. She hardly recognized the woman staring back. Briggs watched her quietly. "You okay?" She hesitated. "I haven't been okay in years, Captain." He didn't push, just gave a small nod, a soldier's understanding, the kind that needs no explanation. They stepped into the cabin together. The air smelled of smoke and fear and gratitude. Passengers turned, gasping softly as they saw her. Applause rose again, louder this time. Someone shouted, "That's her." Another voice said, "The pilot, she saved us." Elena froze. She hadn't expected the sound to hurt, but it did. The praise hit something raw inside her, a part of her that didn't believe she deserved it. A small boy, no older than 8, ran toward her. His face streaked with tears, his hands trembling as he hugged her leg. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thin and shaking. She blinked hard, fighting the tears rising in her throat. Her hand found his hair, gentle. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." The boy's mother caught up, pulling him close, sobbing apologies and gratitude all at once. Elena stepped back, giving them space. Around her, families reunited, strangers held hands, voices overlapping with disbelief and relief. For the first time since she'd stepped on the plane, she smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. Briggs stood beside her, arms crossed. "You should be proud." "Maybe," she said quietly, "but pride wasn't what saved them." He tilted his head. "Then what did?" She looked out the window where firefighters sprayed cooling foam across the ground. "Obligation," she said, "and guilt." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Minutes later, ground crew escorted them off the aircraft. The sun had begun to dip, throwing long shadows across the tarmac. Reporters were already gathering near the terminal fence, cameras flashing. Voices called out, but the noise felt distant, muffled. Elena walked slowly, her boots, no, her sneakers, civilian, ordinary, clicking against the concrete. She didn't feel heroic. She felt exposed, like someone had just torn the cover off years of silence. At the edge of the runway, a paramedic stopped her. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She shook her head. "No, just tired." They led her to a small tent for debriefing. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and antiseptic. A few passengers sat nearby, wrapped in blankets, whispering. Some glanced at her, then looked away, the way people do when gratitude feels too heavy to express. An investigator approached. "Miss Ruiz, I'm with the NTSB. We'll need your statement." "Of course." He sat opposite her, tablet in hand. "First off, we just want to say what you did up there was extraordinary." She forced a faint smile. "It wasn't extraordinary, it was necessary." He nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. "Can you tell me how you realized both pilots were incapacitated?" Her gaze drifted to the floor. "You learn to recognize silence, the wrong kind, the kind that means someone should be speaking but is." He typed, fingers clumsy on the screen. You mentioned you're a former Air Force pilot. Yes, F-16, call sign Horizon. The man looked up surprised. Horizon, I've heard that name. Operation Vanguard, right? Her jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. He hesitated, then nodded. We'll arrange transport for you after the medical checks. Thank you. When he left, Briggs entered quietly, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered her one. Figured you could use this. She took it, nodding her thanks. Steam curled up between them. So, he said after a moment, you were in Operation Vanguard. She didn't look at him. You read reports. Yeah, some. A rescue op gone wrong. You were the only pilot who made it back. She said nothing. The coffee trembled slightly in her grip. He leaned back. You blame yourself. Her eyes met his. You ever leave people behind? He didn't answer right away. Once, he said finally, and yeah, it never leaves. She nodded, her throat tight. That's why I quit. Flying stopped feeling like freedom. It felt like punishment. The silence between them thickened. Outside, engines roared, another flight taking off into the fading light, a sound that once thrilled her, now only hollowed her chest. Briggs studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the quiet strength behind exhaustion. You know, he said softly, most people freeze in crisis. You didn't. She looked down at her hands again. Freezing would have been easier. He chuckled lightly. Yeah, but easy's never what saves people. The tent flap opened. A young reporter slipped in, camera dangling from her shoulder. Excuse me, ma'am, Miss Ruiz. Can we get a quick statement? The world wants to know how you did it. Elena stiffened. No interviews. Please, just a few words. Everyone calling you a hero. That word hero landed like a stone in her chest. She turned to the reporter, eyes steady. Heroes don't have nightmares, she said quietly. They don't wake up remembering the ones they couldn't save. I'm not what you think I am. The reporter blinked, taken aback, then nodded awkwardly and left. Briggs watched her for a moment. You know, that humility, that's what makes people listen. I'm not trying to be heard, Elena said. I just wanted them to live. He smiled faintly. Well, you gave them that. She didn't respond. Her gaze drifted to the tent opening, where the sun burned low over the horizon. Golden light washed across the tarmac, reflecting off the wrecked aircraft. It looked almost peaceful now, like a monument instead of a disaster. A slow breath escaped her. You ever think redemption sneaks up on you when you least want it? Briggs tilted his head. You think that's what this was, redemption? I don't know, she said, but for a moment up there, I wasn't running anymore. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then maybe that's enough. Outside, the crowd was dispersing, ambulances pulling away. Somewhere, a little boy's laugh carried across the air, light, unbroken, alive. Elena closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. It wasn't pride that filled her chest, not even relief. Just a quiet kind of peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't shout or demand applause. The kind that arrives after chaos, whispering only one truth. You did what you had to do. She opened her eyes again, and for the first time since the day she left the Air Force, the horizon didn't look like an enemy. It looked like possibility. What happens after you survive? No one ever tells you that part. The cameras leave. The applause fades. The world moves on to its next story. But the noise inside your head stays, louder than before because now there's silence around it. 2 days had passed since the landing. The news called her the woman of Flight 732. Her face was on every screen, her name trending across networks she'd never used. Ex-Air Force hero saves 243 lives. They made it sound clean, cinematic. But Elena Ruiz knew better. Real heroism wasn't clean. It was messy, trembling, uncertain, like gripping the edge of a cliff and refusing to let go even when your arms give out. She sat alone in a hotel room near the Dallas airport, the curtains half drawn. Outside, jets roared into the sky every few minutes, streaks of silver disappearing into the clouds. Each sound made her flinch. Her uniform, or what was left of that life, lay folded in a suitcase beneath the bed. She hadn't touched it in years. The news anchors had asked for photos for her service background. She refused. Some things didn't belong to the world anymore. On the desk sat a cup of cold coffee and a stack of letters, messages forwarded from her old Air Force inbox. Former comrades, commanders, reporters pretending to be friends. She hadn't opened any of them. But one envelope stood apart. Plain, hand-delivered, no return address. She turned it over. A familiar handwriting scrawled across the front, to Horizon. Her breath caught. Nobody had called her that in years. She tore it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The writing was simple, neat. You once told me every sky has a price. I didn't understand it then. I do now. M. She stared at the signature, M. There was only one person it could be. Major Marcus Vance, her co-pilot during Operation Vanguard, the last person to speak to her before the mission went wrong, the man she'd never seen again. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter. A memory flickered heat, smoke, screaming radios, the blinding flash of an explosion over hostile terrain. The last time she heard Marcus's voice, he was shouting her call sign through the static. Horizon, eject, do it now. And then nothing. They told her later his aircraft never made it back, that he went down in the mountains and his body was never recovered. She'd carried that weight for years, the guilt of living when he didn't. But this letter, it was written after. She closed her eyes. Maybe he survived. Maybe he'd found her. Or maybe, she thought bitterly, it was someone playing cruel games with a ghost. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back. A call from Captain Briggs. She hesitated, then answered. Still hiding from the world. His voice had that same grounded steadiness, the one that carried calm even in chaos. Something like that. News says you're a national hero. You don't sound thrilled. She gave a faint, humorless laugh. You ever feel like people are cheering for the wrong reason? I've seen people cheer for a flag, not the blood that kept it standing, he said. Yeah, I get it. There was a pause, the kind filled with mutual understanding. I'm headed back to base tomorrow, he added. But I thought you should know one of the passengers wants to meet you, the little boy. His mom says he won't stop talking about you. Elena smiled softly despite herself. He doesn't need to see me. He needs to forget me. Maybe, Briggs said, but maybe he just wants to say thank you again properly this time. Silence. Finally she exhaled. Tell them to meet me at the hangar, noon. When the call ended, she sat still for a long time, staring at the folded letter. Then she reached under the bed, pulled out the suitcase and opened it. Inside lay her past, perfectly preserved. The olive-green flight suit, the leather gloves, the weathered patch that read Horizon in bold black letters. Beneath it, an old photograph, 4 pilots standing by a jet, laughing under a blazing sun. Marcus stood beside her, arm around her shoulder, both of them grinning like the sky was theirs forever. She ran her thumb over the image, her chest tight. You once told me every sky has a price. He had been right. The next morning, she drove to a private hangar on the edge of the airfield. The sky was bright and cloudless, the same kind of cruelly perfect day she used to love. The smell of jet fuel hit her as soon as she stepped out of the car. It was both a memory and a ghost. Inside, Briggs waited near an old training aircraft, the boy and his mother beside him. The child's face lit up the moment he saw her. Miss Elena, he shouted, running forward. Mom said you flew the plane like a superhero. She knelt down, smiling faintly. Superheroes don't need luck, kid, I did. He giggled, unbothered by her modesty. From his pocket he pulled a small paper airplane, its wings uneven. Can you make mine fly straight? She took it gently, smoothing the folds. Sure, she said, but remember it's not about flying straight, it's about keeping balance. She tossed it lightly into the air. The paper glider floated, wobbled, then caught a soft draft and sailed gracefully before landing near Briggs's boot. The boy clapped. "You're magic." "Just trained," she said softly. The mother stepped forward, her voice thick. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my son's life. You saved all of us." Elena shook her head. "You don't have to thank me, just live. That's all the thanks I need." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, then led the boy away, waving one last time. When they were gone, Briggs crossed his arms. "You're not as good at hiding as you think." She looked at him. "I'm not hiding." He smirked. "Sure, that's why you're standing in a hangar talking to ghosts." Her eyes drifted to the old jet behind him. Its metal skin reflected the sunlight in shards. "Maybe I am," she admitted, "but some ghosts deserve the truth." Briggs tilted his head. "About Vanguard." She nodded slowly. He said nothing, waiting. Her voice was low, steady, like she was reciting something carved into her bones. "We were sent to extract a stranded recon team over the mountains. 2 jets, me and Marcus. Weather turned. Comms died. They told us to abort. Marcus didn't." She paused, eyes distant. "He saw smoke, said he was going in lower to mark the evac site. I followed. Then the SAM hit. His jet exploded before my eyes. I tried to call for him, but..." She stopped, her throat tightening. "I ejected. I lived. He didn't." The silence afterward was heavy. Only the faint hum of an overhead fan filled it. Briggs finally said, "That wasn't your fault." "I was lead pilot," she whispered. "Everything that happens under your wing is your fault." He stepped closer. "You know that's not true. You did what anyone would have done." She shook her head. "Not anyone, just me, and I got to live with it." He studied her for a long moment. "Maybe that's why you were on that flight. Maybe fate gave you a second chance." "Or a punishment," she said bitterly. "Maybe it wanted to remind me what it's like to watch people's lives in your hands again." "Funny thing about punishment," he said softly. "Sometimes it teaches you mercy, even for yourself." She looked up at him. There was no argument in her eyes, only exhaustion. "You think flying that plane saved me?" "I think it reminded you who you are," Briggs said. "Not Horizon, not the soldier, just someone who doesn't give up when the world falls apart." She turned away, blinking against the sunlight streaming through the hangar doors. It hit the old aircraft just right, glinting off its wings like a mirror. "Maybe," she said, "but I still see his jet every time I close my eyes." "Then maybe you need to find where it fell," he said quietly. "End it properly." Her head turned sharply. "You mean go back?" He nodded. "There's a recovery team heading to the region next month. You've got clearance if you want it. I can pull strings." She stared at him, stunned. "You think that'll fix it?" "No," Briggs said simply, "but it might let you breathe again." For a long time she didn't speak. Then quietly she asked, "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged. "Because I've seen what happens when people like us don't deal with ghosts. They start flying the plane for us, even when we're on the ground." Her gaze softened. For the first time since the crash, she didn't look lost, just thoughtful. "You really think I can go back there?" "I think you already have," he said, "the moment you touched that yoke again." The wind picked up, rustling the loose papers on the workbench. Elena looked down at the folded letter in her hand, the one from Marcus. She unfolded it once more, staring at the words. "Every sky has a price." She whispered to herself, "Then maybe it's time I paid mine." Briggs smiled faintly. "Then let's go find your horizon." The two of them stood there for a moment, the sunlight painting their shadows long against the hangar floor. Outside, another jet thundered upward, cutting through the clouds with effortless grace. Elena watched it rise until it vanished, a silver blur swallowed by blue. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass wall, no longer the quiet woman in seat 21C, but something steadier, unfinished, alive. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it just arrives quietly, disguised as one more chance to do what's right. And for the first time in years, she didn't look away from the sky. How far do you have to travel to face something you've been running from? For Elena Ruiz, the answer was halfway across the world. 2 weeks after the Flight 732 incident, she stood on a sun-bleached runway in eastern Afghanistan, a duffel slung over her shoulder, the desert wind whipping her hair into her eyes. The air smelled of dust, diesel, and memory. It felt like walking straight back into a photograph she'd sworn she would never see again. Captain Briggs climbed down beside her from the transport plane, squinting against the glare. "Still want to do this?" Elena adjusted the strap of her bag. "Want? No. Need? Absolutely." He gave a single nod, the kind of nod that meant he understood more than he said. Around them, a small forward operating base pulsed with quiet activity. Soldiers moved between tents, vehicles idled, and somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors thumped a low, familiar rhythm. Every sound pulled at something inside her. She could almost taste the echoes of her old life: command briefings, adrenaline, the mechanical click of safety levers. But this time she wasn't here to fight. She was here to remember. An officer approached, clipboard in hand. "Captain Briggs, Lieutenant Colonel Yates sent word. You're cleared to accompany the recovery team to Grid Echo 9. Coordinates match the Vanguard crash site." Briggs nodded. "Copy that." The officer's gaze shifted to Elena, recognition flashing. "Your horizon." She didn't confirm it, didn't deny it, just said quietly, "Not anymore." They loaded their gear into a waiting Humvee and rolled out across the barren plain. The landscape stretched endlessly: tan earth, scattered rock, broken by the occasional patch of scrub. Heat shimmered on the horizon like water that wasn't really there. For a long time neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy with purpose. After an hour, Briggs broke it. "You ever think about how fast life changes? 1 minute you're cruising at 30,000 feet, next you're crawling through dirt looking for ghosts." Elena's eyes stayed on the horizon. "I stopped measuring life in minutes a long time ago. Now it's just before and after." He glanced at her. "Before Vanguard, after Vanguard." She gave a faint nod. "Exactly." The road climbed into low hills, the terrain turning jagged. Finally, the Humvee stopped near a ridge of blackened rock. A half-buried piece of metal jutted from the ground, scorched, twisted, and unmistakably aircraft skin. Her breath caught, the world seemed to tilt. Briggs stepped out first, scanning the area. "We're here." Elena followed, her boots crunching on gravel. Every step felt heavier, slower. The closer she got, the harder her chest tightened. The metal fragment bore faded paint, a streak of gray and red, with the faint outline of a serial number. She crouched beside it, brushing off dust. "V1173, she whispered, her voice cracked. "That was his bird." Briggs stayed a few paces behind her, giving her space. She reached out and pressed her palm against the metal. It was warm from the sun, rough under her fingers. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in the desert anymore. She was back in the cockpit, clouds flashing past, Marcus's voice over the radio, calm, teasing, fearless. Then the explosion. She blinked, pulling herself back. Nearby, the recovery team had begun working, metal detectors sweeping, shovels scraping, quiet murmurs in the dry air. Elena drifted among them like a ghost, touching fragments, bits of instrumentation, a melted oxygen mask. The wreckage was scattered over hundreds of yards, a graveyard of twisted aluminum. One of the soldiers approached, holding something small wrapped in cloth. "Ma'am, we found this wedged under a panel. Thought you should see it." He handed it to her. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a tarnished dog tag. "MARCUSVANCE, CAPTUSAF, O+." Her knees gave way. She sank into the dirt, staring at it. The world narrowed to that single piece of metal, all that remained of the man who once trusted her with his life. Briggs knelt beside her, silent. For a while, there was nothing but the sound of wind. Finally, she whispered, "I left him here." Briggs shook his head. Number War did. She turned to him, tears streaking through the dust on her face. "He called for me, I heard him, and I still pulled the eject handle. I saved myself." "Because you had orders," Briggs said. She shook her head again. "Because I was afraid and he was." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Fear isn't weakness, Elena. It's proof you still value life." He'd have wanted that. She laughed bitterly. "You didn't know him." "No," Briggs said, "but I know people who carry the same look in their eyes that you do, people who survived because someone else didn't. You think that's guilt, but it's something else. It's inheritance." She frowned, confused. He went on, "You inherited his courage. You took it with you. That's why those people on Flight 732 are alive. Not because you were fearless, but because once someone taught you what it looks like not to be." Her throat tightened. She looked back down at the tag. The metal glinted faintly in the sun. "Then maybe it's time I gave it back." She stood slowly and walked toward the ridge. There, at the highest point overlooking the crash site, she dug a small hole in the dust and set the dog tag inside. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You told me every sky has a price. I paid it. We both did." Briggs stood behind her, silent, as she covered the tag with earth and smoothed the surface flat. The wind swept over them, carrying away the last trace of sound. When she finally turned, her eyes were red but steady. "I thought coming back here would break me, but all it did was make the noise stop." Briggs gave a small, approving nod. "Then mission accomplished." She managed a faint smile. "You always talk like we're still deployed." He shrugged. "Old habits hard to kill." They walked back toward the Humvee as the sun dipped low, bleeding orange across the sky. The wreck shimmered in the fading light, no longer a wound, but a monument. Halfway to the vehicle, she stopped. "Briggs." "Yeah." "Why did you really come?" He paused, considering. "Because I saw something in you up there, on that plane. The way you fought for every inch reminded me why I joined in the first place. I figured if I helped you find closure, maybe I'd find a little of my own." She tilted her head. "Closure for what?" He gave a faint, wistful smile. "Different story, different ghosts." She didn't press. Some truths earned the right to stay unspoken. That night they camped near the ridge. The desert cooled quickly, the stars burning sharp against a velvet sky. Elena sat by the small campfire, watching embers drift upward like lost souls returning to the heavens. Briggs sat beside her, cleaning his rifle out of habit more than need. For a while neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "Do you think people like us ever get to stop fighting?" He thought about it. "Maybe not. Maybe we just learn to choose what's worth fighting for." She nodded slowly. "I used to think flying was my purpose, that being up there made me untouchable. Turns out it just made me forget what being human felt like." Briggs smiled faintly. "You remember now." She looked up at the stars. "Yeah, and it hurts." He poked the fire with a stick. "That's how you know it's real." They sat in silence again, the kind that isn't empty but full of memory, of forgiveness, of something like peace. At some point, Elena pulled out the letter again, the one Marcus had written. The paper was creased, the ink faded, but the words still burned. "Every sky has a price," she whispered to the flames, "and sometimes it's paid in silence." Briggs glanced at her, then at the horizon. "You ever going to fly again?" She hesitated, then said softly, "I don't know. Maybe not for the world, but maybe for myself." He nodded. "When you do, don't fly to escape, fly to return." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night. She smiled faintly. "You talk like a philosopher, Captain." He chuckled. "Comes with the wrinkles." The stars reflected in her eyes. "I used to think redemption was a destination. Now I think it's just a direction. As long as you keep moving toward it, maybe that's enough. Yeah, Briggs said quietly, maybe that's enough. The night wind swept through the camp, carrying the scent of sand and smoke. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight on her chest finally loosen. For the first time in years, the horizon didn't look like a boundary. It looked like home. And as the fire burned low, she whispered to the darkness, "Rest easy, Marcus. The sky's yours again." When she returned home, nothing looked the same. Not the sky, not the streets, not even her own reflection. Elena Ruiz had been gone for only 3 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime had passed, one where she'd buried ghosts and unearthed the pieces of herself she thought were gone. The apartment was just as she'd left it, plain, quiet, half lived in. A single coffee mug on the counter, an unopened stack of mail. The kind of silence that used to comfort her but now just felt empty. She dropped her duffel by the door, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared out the window. A small plane crossed the sky in the distance, glinting silver in the evening sun. Once, that sight would have made her chest ache with envy. Now it only made her breathe slower. The television was still tuned to a news channel. They were replaying clips from the aftermath of Flight 732, cell phone footage, blurry and shaky. A voiceover said, "The woman credited with saving hundreds remains out of public view. Sources confirm she has refused all interviews." She muted it. People wanted a hero, but she wasn't one. She was just a woman who happened to remember what to do when no one else did. The difference, she'd learned, was vast. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Dallas Aviation Academy. Captain Ruiz, we'd be honored if you joined our mentorship program for veterans transitioning to civilian aviation." She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. She hadn't been Captain Ruiz for years, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding behind who she wasn't and start rediscovering who she could still be. She typed back a single word. "When?" 3 days later, she walked through the hangar of the academy. The scent of oil and aluminum filled the air, an old, familiar comfort. Rows of sleek training planes gleamed under the overhead lights. Cadets in blue uniforms buzzed around, laughter and nervous chatter echoing off the walls. A young instructor met her at the entrance. "Captain Ruiz, it's an honor." She gave a small smile. "Elena's fine." He nodded awkwardly, starstruck. "Right, of course. The students are excited. Most of them watched your story on the news. They're calling you the miracle pilot." She winced slightly. "Let's keep the miracles grounded." He chuckled and led her inside. The classroom was bright, filled with eager faces. 20 students, men and women barely out of their teens, all wearing that same look she once had, hungry to prove themselves. Elena took the front seat, folded her hands, and looked around. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. What did you tell people who still believed the sky was nothing but beauty? How did you teach them that sometimes it bites back? Finally, she spoke. "You all want to fly," she said softly. "You think it's freedom. Maybe it is. But it's also responsibility. Every time you step into that cockpit, you're borrowing something from the sky, and one day it might demand it back." The room went still. One cadet raised her hand. "Ma'am, is it true you landed Flight 732 without landing gear?" Elena's mouth curved faintly. "It's true the plane stopped moving. That's what matters." They laughed softly, easing the tension. Another student asked, "Were you scared?" She nodded. "Yes. Anyone who tells you they aren't scared in a cockpit hasn't flown long enough. Fear isn't your enemy. It's your warning light. It reminds you that what you're doing matters." The cadets leaned forward, listening. There was something in her voice, calm, deliberate, weighted with lived truth, that drew them in. She found herself relaxing as she spoke, her words flowing more naturally than she expected. She told them about composure, about the rhythm of decision-making under pressure, about why humility keeps a pilot alive longer than pride. She didn't mention the war, or Marcus, or the ghosts. Those were lessons they'd find on their own someday. When the session ended, the students applauded softly, not out of fandom but respect. As they filed out, one lingered behind, a young woman with dark eyes and nervous hands. "Captain Ruiz," she said shyly, "I wanted to say I joined because of you. My brother was on flight 732. Elena's heart stilled. He made it out okay. The cadet nodded, eyes bright. "He did. He says you talked to them over the intercom, said they'd live. He said that voice gave them hope." Elena swallowed. "Tell him I'm glad he listened." The cadet smiled, saluted, and left. Elena stood there for a long time after the room emptied. She hadn't realized until that moment how much those words, "you gave us hope," could both heal and hurt at once, because hope was what she'd lost all those years ago, and now somehow it was finding its way back. Later that evening, she met Briggs at a quiet diner near the airfield. He was halfway through a slice of pie when she slid into the booth. "You look different," he said, studying her. She raised an eyebrow. "Older." "Lighter," he corrected, "like you left something behind." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I did, or maybe I just stopped carrying what was never mine to hold." He nodded approvingly. "He'd be proud, you know." "Marcus." Briggs shrugged. "Him, the passengers, the kid, take your pick." She stirred her coffee. "Funny thing about being alive. You spend so long trying to survive that you forget how to live." He smirked. "You sound like me now." She chuckled softly. "Guess your bad philosophy rubbed off." He leaned back. "So what now, you staying here teaching?" She glanced out the window at the glow of the runway lights beyond the diner. "For now. The sky feels less like a threat these days. Maybe I can teach people how not to fear it the way I did." He raised his mug. "To second chances, then." She clinked her cup gently against his. "And to the ones who gave them to us." For a moment, neither spoke. Just the hum of quiet conversation and the clatter of dishes around them. It was peaceful, the kind of peace neither of them had ever trusted before. Then Briggs said, "You know they're nomming a program after you, right?" She blinked. "What?" "Project Horizon. Civilian Crisis Response Training. Based on your handling of 732. They want you to lead it." Elena frowned, uncertain. "I didn't do it for a program." "I know," he said. "That's why you should do it." She exhaled slowly. The thought of turning her worst day into something that might save others. Maybe that was the only kind of justice that ever made sense. "I'll think about it," she said. Briggs smiled knowingly. "That means yes." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You don't take orders well, do you?" "Not since I met you." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, like a lull between storms. The kind of stillness that feels earned. That night back in her apartment, Elena stood by the window looking at the stars. The city lights shimmered below like constellations flipped upside down. Somewhere out there, a plane passed overhead, blinking red and white. She thought about all the people who'd sat behind her that day, strangers who had trusted her without knowing her name. People who had lived because she had finally stopped running. Her reflection looked back at her, older, scarred, calm. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Sometimes the sky takes everything from you, and sometimes it gives it back." A faint smile touched her lips. She turned off the lights and let the moonlight wash over the room. Tomorrow, she'd stand in front of another classroom. Tell another group of young pilots that courage wasn't about fearlessness. It was about staying in the seat when everything inside you wants to let go. And maybe one day, one of them would find themselves in the same position she had, not ready, not perfect, but willing. Because that's all it ever takes. One person who refuses to stay silent when everything is falling apart. How do you lead when you never wanted to be followed? Elena Ruiz had never thought of herself as a symbol, and yet That's exactly what the world had turned her into. 6 months after Flight 732, Project Horizon was no longer just a proposal. It was real, an international crisis response initiative designed to train civilians and off-duty military personnel to manage emergencies midair. It was a fusion of psychology, engineering, and calm under fire, three things she knew better than anyone. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, she'd hidden from anything that made her remember the sky. Now she was building a program to help others face it. The media called her the reluctant hero. The phrase made her cringe. She didn't feel reluctant, just honest. Heroism, she thought, was too clean a word for what actually happened in the real world. Real courage was messy. It sweated. It bled. It doubted itself every step of the way. The facility's main hangar hummed with life. New recruits, old soldiers, engineers, and psychologists working side by side. Simulator pods lined the walls, each one built to replicate mid-air emergencies. The first class of trainees had just begun. Elena stood at the front, watching them run through their drills. Panic simulations, decompression tests, emergency coordination. Each trainee wore headsets, their faces tight with focus. Captain Briggs entered quietly from behind, hands in his pockets. "They're sharp," he said, nodding toward the recruits. "They're scared," she replied without looking at him. "Good, means they know it's real." She turned, smirking faintly. "You always did mistake fear for preparation." He smiled. "And you always mistake humility for weakness." She laughed under her breath. "Maybe that's why we work." They watched in silence for a while. On the far side of the room, one trainee, a woman, maybe 25, froze during a simulation. Her hands hovered uselessly over the controls, eyes wide, breath shallow. Elena could see the panic setting in, the same look she'd seen too many times in combat, and once in the reflection of her own visor. Without hesitation, she crossed the floor, pulled off the trainee's headset and crouched beside her. "Look at me," Elena said softly. The woman blinked, shaking. I messed up, I didn't." "It's fine," Elena interrupted gently. "You froze, it happens." "I can't think when it starts beeping." Elena took her hand, steady but firm. "Then don't think, breathe. The brain follows the body, control that first." The woman's breathing slowed. Her shoulders loosened. The others watched silently. Elena stood and addressed the room. "Everyone listens to the same lie that courage means being fearless. It doesn't. Courage means doing what matters while you're afraid. Remember that, or the sky will remind you." The trainees nodded, the air thick with quiet respect. Briggs caught her eye from across the room, that proud, understated look he got when she proved him right without meaning to. Later, they sat in her small office, papers scattered across the desk, a coffee mug growing cold beside her laptop. "Word spreading fast," Briggs said, scanning the morning report. "Horizon's getting attention from the Defense Department. They want a partner for large-scale drills." Elena sighed. "I wanted this to stay civilian, ordinary people saving ordinary people, no ranks, no salutes." "You can't control how people use what you build," he said gently. "I can try." He gave a half-smile. "That's what scares them about you." She looked up, brow furrowed. "Who?" "Everyone who thinks leadership is about control. You lead by conviction. It makes people uncomfortable because it makes them feel again." She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "That's a nice way to say I'm bad at politics." He grinned. "You're terrible at politics." They both laughed. But beneath the humor, a quiet truth lingered. The world had a way of twisting good intentions into spectacle, and the higher something rose, the harder it fell. By the third month of training, Project Horizon had expanded. Civilian airlines adopted its protocols. Foreign agencies requested licenses. Elena spent her days teaching and her nights flying simulators alone, testing new crisis models until the hangar lights dimmed. One night she found herself replaying the Flight 732 scenario. The same model, same malfunction, same emergency. But this time, she didn't sit in the pilot's seat. She stood outside, watching her digital double handle the crisis. The screen flickered as her recorded voice issued commands. Brace for landing. Head down. Stay calm. You will survive this. Hearing it from the outside hurt more than she expected. It wasn't just the memory, it was how calm she'd sounded, how controlled, how utterly detached from fear. Like a soldier reciting a prayer. Briggs found her there, standing in the blue glow of the screen. You're torturing yourself again. She didn't look away, trying to remember what it felt like. You already know. She shook her head. No, I know what it looked like, that's different. He leaned against the console, arms crossed. You're still trying to prove something. Maybe. To who? She hesitated. Myself. He studied her, his tone softening. You ever think maybe you've already done that? She glanced at him, a faint, tired smile crossing her lips. People like us don't get done, Captain. We just get quieter. He chuckled softly. That's the closest thing to peace we get, huh? Maybe. They stood there a while longer, the simulator flickering with artificial lightning, the hum of machinery filling the silence. Finally, she said, do you ever miss it? The missions, the noise, the adrenaline. Briggs thought for a moment. Sometimes, but mostly I miss the clarity, when the world narrows down to one choice and all the noise fades. Yeah, she whispered, that I understand. He looked at her. You found that again, you know, on that plane, you just didn't want to. She smiled faintly. Maybe redemption doesn't ask for permission. A month later, she was invited to speak at an international aviation summit. Hundreds of attendees, pilots, officials, media packed the auditorium. The topic, courage under pressure. She hated public speaking, always had, but something about this felt necessary not for herself, but for what others might hear between her pauses. When her name was announced, the applause was deafening. She walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and waited for the noise to fade. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but sure. People ask me what it felt like to save a plane full of lives. They use words like bravery, heroism, miracle. But what it really felt like was duty. A hush spread through the hall. I didn't feel brave, she continued. I felt terrified, but fear isn't the opposite of courage. It's the invitation to it. You don't rise because you're fearless, you rise because you care about something more than your fear. She paused, letting the silence breathe. The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs more people who do what's right when nobody's watching, and who don't need a headline to remind them why. She stepped back. The applause was slow at first, then overwhelming. But Elena didn't smile. She just bowed her head slightly and walked off the stage. Backstage, Briggs waited, clapping lightly. You know, for someone who hates speeches, you just rewrote half the definition of courage. She gave him a sidelong look. I wasn't trying to. Exactly why it worked. He handed her a small box, something the trainees wanted you to have. Inside was a polished metal coin, a custom challenge coin with the emblem of Project Horizon. On the back, engraved words. For those who act when silence would be easier. She ran her thumb over the engraving, her throat tightening. For the first time since Flight 732, she felt something deep and unfamiliar, not pride, not guilt, belonging. Briggs smiled softly. Told you you'd lead something bigger than yourself. She looked up at him. Maybe I'm finally learning how. He nodded. You already were, you just didn't notice. That night she stood outside her hotel balcony, the city lights glowing beneath her. Planes drifted soundlessly across the dark sky, hundreds of tiny moving stars. She remembered her first flight as a cadet, the sound of the engine, the feel of the stick trembling under her hand, the rush of infinite space opening before her. She had thought the sky belonged to her then. Now she knew better. The sky belonged to no one. It only borrowed people long enough to test who they were. And when it was done, it gave them back changed. She smiled faintly to herself. Somewhere out there in that vast silence, she imagined Marcus looking down, maybe amused, maybe proud, maybe just at peace. "Every sky has a price," she whispered, "but sometimes it pays you back in grace." The call came just after midnight. A shrill, persistent ring that dragged Elena Ruiz out of a restless sleep. She sat up, heart pounding before she even reached the phone. Years of conditioning, once a pilot, always a pilot, the body remembers emergencies long after the uniform is gone. "Ruiz," she said, voice rough. "Captain, it's Control." The voice on the other end trembled. "We've got an in-flight emergency, civilian training jet, call sign Sparrow 2. They're running one of your Horizon protocols." Her blood ran cold. "What's their status?" "Dual engine failure, 30 miles south of Phoenix. Student pilot at the controls. Instructor unconscious after a bird strike through the canopy. They're trying to reach emergency frequency, but—" "Patch me in," Elena said before he could finish. There was a click, then static, then a young voice, ragged with panic. "Mayday, Mayday, Sparrow 2. Engines 1 and 2 are dead, trying restart, nothing, oh God." Elena's tone dropped to a razor-calm whisper. "Sparrow 2, this is Elena Ruiz with Project Horizon. I'm on your channel. What's your name?" A breath, then Cadet Laura Kim. I can't." "Yes, you can," Elena cut in softly. "Listen to me, Laura, breathe. That's the first thing." A shaky inhale. "That's it," Elena said. "Now tell me your altitude." 5,000 and dropping. No power, no response on right aileron." "Copy. You're flying the Horizon X trainer, correct?" "Yes." Elena grabbed the manual from her shelf. She didn't need it, but holding it steadied her hands. "Okay, Laura, you've trained for this. Remember Lesson 3, glide ratio 10 to 1. Pick your landing field. There's desert, nothing flat." "There's always something flat enough if you make it," Elena said. "Eyes forward. You've got maybe 3 minutes of air left. You're not falling, you're flying without engines. Understand?" Briggs burst into the apartment doorway. She must have texted him without realizing. He was already dressed, phone in hand, listening to the same frequency. Elena covered the mic. "Instructor out, student pilot low altitude." He nodded grimly. "You can talk her in." Elena turned back to the headset. "Laura, I want you to trim for glide, hands light on the stick. Don't fight the aircraft, guide it. What's your airspeed?" 85 knots. "Good, keep it there, you're stable. Now look left, you'll see a dark stretch, that's Route 17. Parallel it. Don't aim for the road, aim for the space beside it." The girl's breathing quickened again. "I can't do this, he's not moving, I can't." "Yes, you can." Elena's voice dropped to almost a whisper, the same tone she'd used on 732 when chaos had swallowed everything. "Laura, I've been exactly where you are. You hear me? You're not alone in that cockpit." Silence for a heartbeat. Then the girl's voice cracked. "You're that Elena Ruiz, aren't you?" "Yes," she said simply. "And right now that means I know what you need to do. Focus on your instruments. You've got this." The transmission hissed. "Altitude 4,000, still dropping." "Okay, you're going to prep for a dead stick landing. Fuel off, mixture cut. Gear down only if you have pressure, check it." "No pressure." "Leave it up, belly landing." Briggs whispered. "History repeats itself." Elena didn't look at him. Not this time. She listened to the girl's uneven breathing through the static. "Laura, listen carefully. When you see the ground coming up fast, don't pull back too early. Flare at the last heartbeat. Trust the training." "Copy," the girl said, voice steadier now. Elena closed her eyes. She could almost see it, the dying glide, the shimmer of sand beneath a dark sky, the desperate seconds before impact. Then a sound she knew by heart, the hollow thud of contact, the hiss of sand, the squeal of metal sliding to stillness. Static, then nothing. Laura. No answer. She gripped the mic tighter. Sparrow 2, report. Static. Briggs met her eyes, silent. Then a weak voice. This is Sparrow 2. We're down, intact, instructors alive. Elena's breath left her in one long, trembling exhale. The control tower confirmed recovery teams en route. The girl was safe. Both of them were. For a long time, Elena just sat there, headset still on, eyes closed, every muscle in her body releasing at once. Briggs leaned against the wall, arms folded, a faint smile breaking through the tension. You just saved another one, from your living room. She gave a shaky laugh. Maybe she saved herself, I just reminded her how. He tilted his head. That's leadership, Ruiz. You pass on what kept you alive. She looked down at her hands, steady now. Funny. I thought I'd never feel that again, that edge between fear and control. But it's different this time. Quieter. He nodded. That's what healing sounds like. The next day, the footage from the rescue hit the news. A student pilot surviving a mid-air failure using Project Horizon's emergency guidance. Headlines called it another miracle from Horizon. Elena switched the TV off halfway through. She wasn't angry, just tired. The world loved a neat story. It didn't want to see the doubt, the shaking hands, the whispered fear. It wanted its heroes tidy, photogenic, marketable. Briggs stopped by with coffee. You should be proud. I am, she said quietly, but not of me. He nodded, then of who? Of her, Elena said. She didn't freeze. That's the whole point. The world doesn't need me to keep landing planes. It needs to believe someone else can. Briggs smiled, and now they do. Weeks passed. The Academy ran mock rescues based on the Sparrow 2 incident. Elena used it as a teaching case, not to glorify success, but to dissect fear. During one class, she asked the trainees, "What's the most dangerous part of flying?" One cadet said, "Mechanical failure," another, "Weather." She shook her head. It's silence. When the mind goes quiet because it's afraid, that's when everything is lost. Your job is to break that silence before it kills you. They wrote her words down like scripture. Later, after the session, Laura Kim herself walked into the hangar. Her arm was bandaged, a faint scar across her forehead, but she stood tall. "Captain Ruiz," she said, smiling nervously. "Thought I'd come say thank you in person this time." Elena smiled back. "You didn't have to." "I know," Laura said, "but you were the voice that didn't give up on me. I want to join Project Horizon, teach what you taught me." Elena blinked, surprised. "You sure? Most people would stay far from another cockpit after that." Laura laughed softly. "Maybe, but I figure fear only wins if it keeps you grounded." Elena felt her throat tighten. She saw herself in the girl, the same determination, the same trembling hands hiding behind courage. "All right," she said finally, "you're in." That evening, Briggs found her standing alone by the airfield fence, watching the sunset burn through streaks of cloud. "She reminds you of you," he said quietly. Elena smiled. "She reminds me of who I was supposed to be." He stood beside her, hands in his pockets. Funny thing about mentorship. You think you're passing on knowledge, but really, you're rewriting your own story through someone else. "Maybe that's how redemption works," she said softly. "Not erasing the past, just turning it into something that keeps someone else alive." The light faded slowly, the last rays painting the plains in gold. Briggs said, "You ever think about getting back in the air again? For yourself?" She took a long breath, then nodded. "Maybe, but this time I'll know who I'm flying for." He smiled, "And who's that?" She looked at the horizon, eyes soft. "Everyone who's ever sat in seat 21C, quietly, afraid, waiting for someone to stand up." The wind shifted, warm and alive. For a moment it almost felt like the sky was listening. Later that night, alone in her office, Elena opened a journal, something she hadn't done since the war. She began to write. There's no such thing as a fearless pilot. There are only pilots who have learned to live with fear until it becomes a companion, a voice reminding you why you fight to stay steady. I used to hate that voice. Now I teach others to listen to it. She closed the book and stared out at the hangar lights flickering against the night. Somewhere above, a plane's engines echoed faintly. It didn't make her flinch anymore. It sounded like belonging. The airfield was silent except for the hum of lights along the runway. Dusk was falling, that strange hour where sky and earth seemed to trade places, where everything looked softer like memory. Elena Ruiz stood beside an old training jet, her hand resting on the cool metal skin. The horizon was painted in fire gold fading into violet, the kind of beauty that always arrived just before night. It had been a year since Flight 732. A year since she'd sat in seat 21C, pretending to be ordinary. A year since she'd remembered what it felt like to take responsibility for lives that weren't hers, and found, somehow, her own again. The world had changed around her. Project Horizon had grown beyond anything she imagined: new branches, international partnerships, a global network of crisis response pilots. Her name, once something she ran from, now stood on every badge, every training manual, every oath sworn by new recruits. But fame was never the reward, peace was. And even that, she'd learned, wasn't a permanent state. It was something you had to earn again and again, one breath at a time. Behind her, footsteps approached. "You're still here," Briggs said. She turned, smiling faintly. "You're still bad at goodbyes." He grinned. "That's because we never actually say them, we just redeploy." She chuckled softly. "Guess that's true." He stepped closer, glancing at the plane. "You really gonna do it?" Elena nodded. "One last flight." "You sure you want to be up there alone?" "I'm not," she said quietly. "Not anymore." He studied her, then gave a slow nod. "Then I'll be on the radio." She smiled. "I'd expect nothing less, Captain." As he walked toward the control tower, she climbed into the cockpit. The seat creaked under her weight, familiar, grounding. Her fingers brushed over the controls, the switches, the throttle. Each one was a memory, each touch a reminder that fear only holds power if you don't face it. The headset crackled. "Tower to Horizon 1, you're cleared for takeoff." She froze at the call sign. Horizon 1. For a second, her throat tightened. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was every version of herself she had buried: the soldier, the survivor, the woman who'd refused to let fear define her. "Copy that," she said, her voice steady. "Rolling." The engine roared to life, vibrating through the metal, through her bones. The runway lights stretched ahead like a pathway to forgiveness. She pushed the throttle forward and the aircraft began to move faster, smoother, rising with the wind. At 80 knots, the ground started to blur. At 100, it vanished altogether. The jet lifted into the sky, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was escaping anything. She wasn't flying to forget. She was flying to remember. From the tower, Briggs watched through binoculars, his radio pressed to his ear. "How's it feel up there?" Elena's laugh came through the static, soft and breathless, like coming home. The sun melted below the edge of the world. The sky turned deep indigo, stars flickering awake one by one. The city lights shimmered far below, quiet, innocent, unaware of the woman tracing invisible circles above them, writing closure across the dark. She flew higher, the air thinning, the hum becoming music. The old instincts returned, the way the stick responded like an extension of her hand, the balance between lift and gravity, the pulse of freedom against her palms. But this wasn't about control anymore. It was about release. For so long, she'd carried guilt like oxygen, unseen but essential. Now, for the first time, she allowed herself to breathe without it. She switched to a private channel, one no one else could hear. "Marcus," she whispered into the mic, "if you're still listening, I finally get it. You weren't fearless. You were just willing. That's what I missed." Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking. "I used to think survival was about strength, but it's not. It's about grace, the kind that shows up when you finally stop running from yourself." A long silence followed. Only the wind answered, but somehow it felt like enough. Briggs' voice came back through the headset. "Tower to Horizon 1. You've got a beautiful sky tonight." She smiled, tears catching the light from the panel. "Yeah," she said softly, "I do." Below her, the world curved gently, a patchwork of dark and light, cities glowing like constellations, roads like veins of gold. She thought about all the people she'd met since that day, the passengers who'd written her letters, the cadets who'd studied her story, the young pilot who'd lived because she'd listened. They were all part of the same quiet miracle, the proof that courage doesn't die, it just passes hands. As the plane leveled at 15,000 feet, she took one final breath of that thin, untamed air. Then, gently, she turned the jet back toward the runway. Briggs' voice broke the silence again. "Horizon 1, you're clear to land." She smiled through the tears she hadn't noticed falling. "Copy, Tower, coming home." The descent was smooth, the lights guiding her like a promise kept. As the wheels touched down, she felt the smallest jolt, the kind that said, "You're back, and you did it right this time." The aircraft slowed, gliding to a stop. The engine wound down. The world grew quiet again. Elena sat there for a long moment, hands resting loosely on the controls, the faint smell of jet fuel in the air. And then she whispered, not to Briggs, not to anyone listening, but to the silence itself. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Later, she stood by the fence again, watching the hangar lights dim. Briggs joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "Thought you quit caffeine," he said. "I quit running," she corrected. "Caffeine's harmless." He handed her a cup. "How'd it feel?" "Different," she said. "I used to think flying was about defying gravity, but it's not. It's about trusting it'll always bring you back." He nodded, taking a sip. "So what now?" She smiled faintly. "Now, I let others fly, my turn to stay on the ground and watch them rise." He looked at her for a long moment, something like admiration or maybe gratitude in his eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "I've served with people who fought wars, who saved lives, who changed history, but I've never met anyone who made peace look like this." She chuckled softly. "Peace isn't a victory, Captain. It's just the moment you stop needing one." They stood in silence, listening to the hum of the night. A plane roared somewhere in the distance, lifting off into the stars. Elena looked up, following it with her eyes until it vanished into darkness. "There," she said softly, "that sound used to scare me. Now it feels like prayer." Briggs smiled. "Then I guess you finally found your horizon." She turned to him, the faintest glimmer of light in her eyes. "No, Captain. I learned it was never lost. It was just waiting for me to look up again." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain, rare, cleansing, alive. And in that moment, as thunder murmured in the distance and the sky pulsed with quiet light, Elena Ruiz closed her eyes and breathed. Not the breath of a soldier. Not the gasp of survival. Just the soft, human exhale of someone who had finally stopped fighting the past. The storm broke, gentle and forgiving. Rain dotted the tarmac, turning every reflection into a shimmer of stars. Briggs lifted his face to it, smiling. "Good weather for flying." Elena opened her eyes, the raindrops glinting in them like constellations. "No," she said softly, "good weather for landing." Later, in the quiet of her office, she wrote the final entry in her journal. "Some skis test you, others heal you. Some days demand strength, others ask only for stillness. I used to believe the world needed heroes. Now I know it needs listeners, people who stay calm when others break, who remind the frightened that the storm always passes. Fear isn't our enemy, it's proof that we still care. And courage is just grace with its sleeves rolled up. She set down the pen, closed the book, and turned off the light. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the sky itself. And in that sound, Elena Ruiz found everything she'd been searching for all along. Not forgiveness, not glory, just peace.